Chapter 6: Confession and Vulnerability. Sena didn't stop running until the spectral echoes had faded entirely, and the sound of her own frantic breathing was the loudest thing in the forest. Kieran was right behind her, surprisingly agile despite his books and academic sensibilities. When she finally leaned against a great, groaning pine trunk, doubling over to catch her breath, he didn't crowd her. He stood a respectful distance away, his hands held up in a gesture of truce and concern. The spectral cold had lifted. The ghost pack, stunned into silence by the accidental revelation of the ancestral vision, had momentarily retreated. Sena felt the dizzying disorientation ease, replaced by a profound, physical exhaustion. "Sena, you need to sit down," Kieran said, his voice stripped of its academic excitement, replaced by urgent worry. "You're swaying. That was not geological feedback. I don't know what kind of phenomenon that was, but it hit you like a wave. It felt personal." Sena pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes. If she had been clever, she would have continued to feign a panic attack and run home. But she couldn't. She had seen the binding script. The heirloom was a written truth, not a mythological object. And Kieran had felt the energy of the ancestors who buried it. Her deception had become too complicated for flight. She needed to anchor her lie in a deep, emotional truth to make it stick. She straightened up slowly, facing him. "It is personal, Kieran. That's what I tried to tell you last night. This land, my family, we are intertwined with it in a way you can't understand." She gestured toward his tent. "Come on, I can't stay near that river mouth right now. The spirits are volatile." They walked back to his camp. The transition back to the mundane, the scent of cold coffee grounds, the crinkle of paper, was jarring. Sena sank onto the camp stool he offered her, rubbing her temples. Kieran handed her a thermos of water. "You talk about spirits and legends like they're hard science," he observed, his expression thoughtful, not condescending. "I'm a man of facts. But when the facts are this inconsistent, geology that doesn't match, energy pulses that affect only you, and legends that are too specific, it means there's a huge, undiscovered variable." He took a seat opposite her, his usual energy subdued. "I need to know what that variable is, Sena. Not for a publication, but for clarity. Are you a medium? Is your family the reason for the protective energy? I won't move another inch of dirt if I know I'm causing you physical pain." His earnestness chipped away at her resolve. She knew if she told him the full truth, "I am a werewolf outcast and the dead members of my family want to kill you," he would flee and Rorik would be satisfied. But the idea of his leaving felt suddenly, overwhelmingly lonely. "Why are you here, Kieran?" she asked instead, deflecting the impossible question. "You said you were looking for forgotten history. Why this spot? Why so intensely?" Kieran looked down at his hands, turning the rough pad of his thumb over a calloused finger. The question seemed to dislodge a deeper vulnerability in him. "It's about my father," he admitted, his voice quiet and rougher than his usual academic tone. "He was an historian, brilliant, but he spent 20 years of his life trying to prove the existence of a missing ancient civilization in the Eastern European mountains. He was laughed out of every institution, discredited. He died before he could prove it." Kieran looked up, and the usual spark in his eyes was replaced by raw, determined passion. "He wasn't wrong, Sena. I've found fragments of his research in other cultures. He was looking in the wrong place. His life was dismissed because he followed a gut feeling instead of the established consensus." He paused, leaning forward. I'm here to prove that history exists beyond the textbook. I'm here to validate the people who were erased. If those spirits, your ancestors, are trying to protect a story, that story deserves to be heard. I won't let their legacy be ignored, just like I won't let my father's memory be discredited. The confession was a revelation. His quest wasn't driven by ambition, but by a deep-seated need for vindication and preservation. He mirrored her own deepest, unspoken purpose, to protect the legacy of her kin. Sena felt a powerful, irresistible surge of empathy. His vulnerability was more disarming than any strength Rorik possessed. She knew she couldn't reveal the whole truth, but she couldn't lie completely either. My family is the source of the energy, Sena conceded, lowering her voice until it was almost a whisper. It was the deepest truth she had ever shared with an outsider. Not in the way you think, not just a metaphor. We are tied to this soil. We are the keepers of an ancient contract with the land, and that contract has rules. She looked him directly in the eye, trying to project the sincerity she felt. The spirits you felt, they are the guardians of the contract. They are protective, fierce, and they have strict rules about what can and cannot be revealed. If someone gets too close to the core truth, the binding truth that holds them here, they don't just lash out. They try to destroy the intruder because they believe that truth is the only thing keeping the forest safe. And you, Kieran asked gently, where do you fit in? Are you bound by the rules of this contract? I am the conduit, Sena lied, or rather, twisted the truth. I have the eyes to see the guardians, the way to anticipate their anger. That's why I can warn you. My job is to mislead the curious, to guide them toward harmless facts, like the quarry, and away from the central covenant. My job is to be the shepherd who keeps the flock of intruders from the cliff. She let the statement hang in the air, a devastating blend of truth and self-serving fiction. She was telling him, I am lying to you to save your life, without having to say the L word. Kieran absorbed this, his eyes searching hers for doubt or malice. He found neither. He found conviction. So you came back to me because you needed to steer me away from the cliff, he summarized, his voice hushed. And when I strayed, the spirits used your body to manifest their warning. Exactly, Sena breathed, grateful he was putting the pieces together in a way that protected her family. If you keep digging near that granite formation, I can't protect you, Kieran. My duty ends where the contract begins. The only way you can stay is if you agree to let me guide your research completely. I give you the path, you follow it. Kieran sat back, considering the impossible terms. The intense connection they had shared over the last few days, the intellectual spark, the shared vulnerability, made the decision agonizing. His entire life was dedicated to digging up the buried truth, and Sena was asking him to accept a carefully curated lie. If I agree, Kieran finally said, meeting her gaze, I'm trusting you entirely, Sena. I'm trusting you with my professional integrity. And I am trusting you with my life, Sena countered instantly. Because if Rorik finds out I've partnered with you instead of driving you out, he'll eliminate us both. Kieran nodded, a profound seriousness settling on his features. Then we are partners, Sena. I trust the shepherd. Just as their strange, impossible covenant was struck, a flicker of movement caught Sena's eye at the edge of the clearing. It was swift and low, a shadow that moved too intelligently to be an ordinary animal. It was a piece of dark ribbon, caught in a low branch, tied into a tight, complex knot. Sena recognized the knot immediately. It was a tracking marker, used only by the living pack's most elite hunters. Rorik had sent a scout. Her brother was no longer relying on her vague reports. He was watching. The shepherd had just been placed under surveillance by the Alpha. The clock had just started ticking down to Rorik's extraction. Chapter 7: The Warning Shot. Sena didn't mention the tracking marker. She forced herself to smile, to nod, to accept the thermos of lukewarm tea Kieran offered. She made small talk about his plan to use ground-penetrating radar on the quarry site tomorrow. But beneath the calm surface, her mind was a whirlwind, charting the coordinates of the dark ribbon. The knot she had seen was a hunter's tribri. It wasn't just a marker. It was a signal that the scout was actively following her path, reporting back to Rorik on her movements, her duration of stay, and, most importantly, her proximity to the human. If Rorik thought the quarry redirection was effective, he wouldn't bother with a scout. This meant the pack suspected she was lying, or worse, that they had their own way of sensing the heightened spiritual activity around the confluence of the two watchers, activity Sena had generated by running away. The moment she was back on the trail toward her cabin, Sena abandoned all pretense of a leisurely stroll. She ran, utilizing the paths the pack used for rapid territorial coverage, avoiding the wide deer trails. The ghost pack was still subdued, a faint, cold hum, but their silence felt more menacing than their complaints. They were waiting for her to fail. She reached her cabin around dusk. As she secured the door, the ominous sound of an engine broke the evening quiet, the heavy, diesel cough of Rorik's old, battered pickup truck. He was here. Sena barely had time to throw her pack onto the floor before the heavy thud of his boots hit her porch. She knew better than to keep him waiting. Rorik stood in the doorway, blocking the last of the light. He wasn't in his wolf form, but the intensity of his presence was just as terrifying. His eyes, the same shade of icy blue as Lyra's spectral glow, fixed on her with cold assessment. "You've been with the trespasser," Rorik stated, his voice flat and hard, free of accusation, which made it all the more chilling. "I was performing my patrol duty, Alpha," Sena replied, defaulting to the formal title when under scrutiny. "He's a nuisance with permits. I gave him a story about the quarry being the real historical site. He's digging far to the southwest. He'll be gone in a week, empty-handed, and with no media attention." Rorik stepped inside, ignoring the spectral cold that clung to the corners of the room. He didn't look at her. He looked at the floor, the walls, the map still on her desk, searching for signs of weakness or compromise. He sent a ping on the secure net about a powerful energy pulse near the river gorge yesterday, Rorik said, his voice dangerously low. "A localized spike of unexplained interference. Our sensors caught it too. It was too localized for a storm and too powerful for anything natural. Explain that, Sena." Sena's heart hammered against her ribs. Rorik hadn't just relied on the scout. The pack had their own monitoring system that tracked the bizarre, spiritual fallout of the ghost pack's manifestations. Her own terror, triggered by the historical echo she witnessed, had registered as a measurable disturbance. "I encountered him near the gorge," Sena improvised quickly, leaning on her established truth. "I gave him the full force of the legends, the spirits, the curse, the madness. I told him the land was actively hostile. That energy pulse, it was my own terror. I'm tied to the land, I feel its rejection strongly. I told him he was making me sick. It's what drove him to relocate to the quarry." Rorik walked up to her, his shadow engulfing her. He smelled of pine, damp earth, and the faint metallic tang of latent wolf. You played the frail woman. You used your weakness as a weapon. Sena didn't flinch. I used the only leverage I have, Alpha. He thinks I'm a local victim of the land's curse. It makes him protective and dismissive of the area you truly care about. I am the shepherd, Rorik. I lead the wolf to the dummy trail. Rorik stared at her for a long, heavy moment. He wasn't convinced, but he also couldn't entirely dismiss the effectiveness of her subterfuge. Sena had never shown this kind of cunning before. "A week," Rorik finally said, his finger pointed sharply at her chest. "You have 1 week. If that man is not gone, if his presence causes one more ripple of unwanted attention, then your stewardship has failed. And when you fail, we clean up your mess. And you know how we clean up." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "And Sena, don't let your eyes fool you into thinking his heart is safe. He's a danger, even if he doesn't know it yet. Keep him away from the rock and away from your spirit." As Rorik's truck roared to life and retreated into the darkness, Sena felt a sickening drop in her stomach. Her lie had bought her time, but it had increased the pressure tenfold. Sena tried to sleep, but the lingering fear and the cold, silent disapproval of Lyra from the shadows kept her awake. The pressure was intense. She had promised to eliminate the threat in a week. Just as the moon crested over the highest peaks, casting a sharp, ethereal light through the grimy window, Sena heard a sound that didn't belong. The distinct, rhythmic thud-thud-thud of a heavy tool. It was too late for Kieran to be working at the quarry. Panic seized her. Had he lied? Had he found something at the quarry that led him back to the river? She pulled on her boots and jacket, grabbed her knife, and plunged back into the dark woods, running by instinct toward the forbidden gorge. As she burst into the open clearing near the confluence of the two watchers, she saw the scene, and her blood ran cold. Kieran's tent was still at the quarry. This was not Kieran. A figure, large and shadowy, was standing near the granite formation. This figure was not digging. They were methodically, deliberately, sawing through the thick, living roots of the massive pine trees that grew along the embankment, right near the base of the forbidden granite. A soft, fleshy moan, followed by a heavy crack, echoed through the night. One of the tallest pines, its base severely compromised, began to lean precariously. Its crown pointed directly at the riverbank where Kieran had taken his water sample, the spot he was most likely to return to. This was not a mistake. This was a targeted warning shot. The figure turned, their silhouette unmistakable in the moonlight, a lean, tall, powerful man. It was Lachlan, Rorik's most loyal and ruthless patrolman, the very one who had accompanied Rorik during their conversation. Lachlan hadn't been waiting for her to fail. He had been sent to guarantee it. The deliberate weakening of the massive trees, set to fall at the slightest shift in wind or water pressure, was meant to create an accident, a clear, brutal, and untraceable death for the trespasser. Lachlan saw Sena emerge from the shadows. He didn't look surprised, only disgusted. "The Alpha gave you a chance, Sena," Lachlan said, his voice a low growl that held the rough texture of a shifting throat. "A week. But the land doesn't need a soft shepherd, it needs a hard wolf. This is the cleanup." Sena knew she couldn't fight him, not in her human form. But she couldn't let him finish. If Lachlan destabilized the trees any further, Kieran wouldn't survive the return journey tomorrow. She threw herself forward, not toward Lachlan, but toward the one tree Lachlan hadn't touched yet, placing her body directly in the line of the partially sawn trunks. "Get out of the way," Lachlan snarled, grabbing her arm with an iron grip that instantly bruised her skin. "No," Sena shrieked, fighting to twist free. "The pressure points are wrong. If you cut that last one, they'll fall now. Not in the morning, you'll bring the whole bank down." The sheer, terrified conviction in her voice must have briefly stalled him. He looked down at her, then up at the precariously leaning trees. He realized in that split second that her intimate knowledge of the forest was true. Lachlan shoved her violently away. She flew backward, hitting the forest floor with a breathless thud. "This is not over, traitor," Lachlan spat, turning and disappearing into the darkness in a rapid, bounding stride that was halfway between human and wolf. The mission was accomplished enough to send the message. Sena lay on the cold, damp earth, shivering, staring at the looming, damaged silhouettes of the pines. She was battered, terrified, and painfully aware of the depth of Rorik's resolve. The living pack wasn't waiting for her deception to fail. They were accelerating the threat. Kieran was no longer just an academic curiosity. He was a target, and Sena was now the only thing standing between him and a planned, fatal accident. Chapter 8: Confession and Vulnerability. Sena lay on the earth for a full minute, unable to move. Every gasp was a shallow sting in her ribs. The spot where Lachlan had gripped her arm throbbed with a dull, burning pain, and the side of her hip, where she'd landed against a root, screamed in protest. But the fear was the worst injury. It was the crushing certainty that her deception, her carefully crafted, shepherd routine, had not only failed but had brought the death sentence right to Kieran's doorstep. She knew she couldn't call Rorik's bluff. Lachlan wouldn't have been there without the Alpha's direct order. The living pack wasn't waiting for failure, they were preempting success. Sena finally hauled herself upright, wincing. She didn't look at the trees again. The sight of the massive pines, ready to collapse at the whim of the wind, was a paralyzing, silent promise of murder. She had to get to Kieran, now. She abandoned the subtle pack trails and took the most direct, brutal route back toward the quarry site, stumbling over roots and tearing her jacket on thorn bushes. She ran on adrenaline, the spectral cold of the ghost pack barely registering now. They were quiet, watching her frantic, desperate action, saving their judgment for the outcome. It was nearly midnight when Sena stumbled into Kieran's camp. The quarry site was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the stars filtering through the open pit. Kieran was asleep inside his small, dome tent. Sena fumbled with the zipper, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't pull the tab. "Kieran, wake up, get up now." The panic in her voice was enough. The tent zipper ripped open from the inside, and Kieran scrambled out in a state of confused alertness, his glasses askew, holding a flashlight in one hand and a hefty geological hammer in the other. The beam of the flashlight snapped onto Sena. He didn't drop the hammer, but his posture immediately shifted from defensive to horrified. "Sena, what happened to you?" Her hair was a mess of dirt and leaves, her face was streaked with sweat and tears, and she was visibly trembling. She wasn't just pale, she was mottled white and green in the starlight. "It wasn't a bear," she choked out, leaning against the tent pole for support. "It wasn't a pack of dogs, it was them, it was my brother." Kieran set the hammer down slowly, his eyes fixed on the darkening bruise already blooming on her arm where Lachlan had grabbed her. He stepped closer, his gaze searching her face. "The hunters," he stated, his voice tight, "the local militia you call an alpha, they did this to you." Sena nodded rapidly, tears finally breaching the dam of her fear. "A man named Lachlan, he's Rorik's right hand, he was at the river gorge, not digging, cutting." She forced the words out, trying to be concise and terrifyingly clear. "He was severing the roots of the largest pines near the rock formation, the granite you said didn't belong. He meant to destabilize the bank. They're set to fall. They'll drop right onto the riverbank tomorrow when you go back for your water sample. It will look like a freak accident. He was trying to murder you." The accusation hung heavy in the damp night air. It was a truth so brutal, so far removed from the academic pursuit of history, that Kieran visibly staggered. "Murder," he repeated, the words sounding foreign on his lips. "Why? Why would they? We've only been here 3 days, and we're miles from the mainland." Sena grabbed his jacket sleeve, pulling him closer. "Because the lie failed, Kieran. My story about the quarry bought us time, but it brought attention. They know I was leading you astray. They knew you would eventually go back to that granite. That rock is the covenant. They don't just want you gone, they want your curiosity eliminated." She looked down at her bruised arm, then back up at him, her vulnerability now a sharp, visible wound. "Rorik gave me a week. Lachlan was the cleanup crew. If I hadn't run there, they would have been ready by sunup." Kieran stood motionless, processing the sudden, terrifying shift in reality. He wasn't dealing with eccentric locals anymore. He was dealing with organized violence. He reached out, gently lifting her injured arm, examining the purple imprint of Lachlan's fingers. His touch was feather-light, but it sent a fresh wave of agony through Sena. "We have to call the police, Sena," he said, his voice hard with protective anger. Sena shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, that's the worst thing you could do. Rorik and Lachlan would be gone before the first car hit the dirt road. This is their territory. They are deeply rooted. They'll see the police as a declaration of war, and they will retaliate against me, against my mother, against anyone who stays on the land." "So we just pack up and leave?" Kieran asked, his voice cracking with frustration and fear. The thought of running, of giving up, clearly went against every grain of his character. He was standing in the exact position his father had been, discredited, threatened, and facing an impossible enemy. Sena watched him, seeing the inner conflict rage behind his eyes. He wouldn't quit, not because of the research, but because of his pride and his need for vindication. "I told you my story yesterday," Kieran whispered, his voice falling into the quiet intimacy of their shared danger. "I told you about my father. I can't leave, Sena. Not now. Not when I know the secret is real and it's protected by violence. This confirms everything I suspected about the hidden power here." He squeezed her hand, gently but firmly. "But I can't stay if it means they'll hurt you again, if you have to choose between me and your family's safety." "I already chose," Sena interrupted, the confession wrenching itself out of her chest. "I chose the moment I saw the hunters not near your camp, and I chose again when I put myself between Lachlan and those trees. I chose you, Kieran, because you see a truth worth fighting for, and because you're the only person who hasn't judged me for what I am or what I'm not." She had never been so honest, so vulnerable. She was laying her failures, her isolation, and the certainty of her death at his feet. Kieran's eyes, magnified by his glasses, were full of a terrible, quiet understanding. He didn't try to kiss her. He didn't try to soothe her. He accepted the weight of her choice. "Then we stop being a shepherd and an intruder," Kieran said, his tone resolute, a switch flipped from academic to strategist. "We become allies, partners. If they want to play a game of strategy, we will use strategy. We use the lie you already established." He took her hands in his, ignoring the dirt and the cold. "Your brother thinks you're weak and that I'm naive. We'll lean into that. We'll make them think I'm leaving, but we'll use the access I have, my equipment, my permits, to find the actual information that is protected by that granite." He paused, looking toward the dark forest that concealed the violence of her kin. "Tell me about the binding truth, Sena. Tell me about the inscription you saw. If the ghost pack is trapped by a truth, maybe setting the truth free is the only way to save ourselves." Sena nodded, her fear slowly coagulating into a cold, hard determination. The living pack wanted her dead. The dead pack wanted him gone. The only way out was to solve the historical mystery that bound them all. She had found a purpose and a partner in the face of oblivion. "It's a huge stone slab," Sena began, pulling him closer to the faint light of his lamp, ready to tell him about the pact, the curse, and the ghosts. "It's hidden in a fissure near the base of the granite, and the ghosts don't want anyone to read it." Chapter 9: The Forbidden Night. Sena's confession was a dam breaking. As she spoke, the words rushed out, the history of the first alpha, the binding ritual performed to tie the pack's spirits to the land, and the curse that had been passed down to her. Kieran listened, his gaze never leaving her face, his earlier academic curiosity now a profound, empathetic understanding. She felt the absence of the ghost pack's immediate presence, replaced by a tense, spiritual silence. They were listening, too, their fury held in check by the sheer magnitude of the secret she was revealing. When she finished, they sat for a long time in the quiet of the forest, lit only by the last of the embers from Kieran's fire. The air was thick with the weight of her shared truth. "The spirits you've seen, they're your ancestors," Kieran finally said, his voice hushed with awe. "And the heirloom isn't a relic, it's the physical contract that trapped them here." "It's a huge stone slab covered in writing," Sena confirmed, feeling an odd lightness now that the lie was gone. "I saw it in a vision. Lachlan was sawing the roots of the trees right where it's buried. It's the physical nexus of the haunting." Kieran nodded, his mind already shifting from historian to strategist. "So, their plan is to cause an accident to get rid of me, but the real goal is to keep anyone from seeing what's under that rock. We need to get the stone slab before Rorik and his men do. If we can get a photograph of the inscription, we'll have proof of everything, and we can force them to leave us alone." "But Rorik is watching us," Sena reminded him, her voice low. "Lachlan saw me. He knows I'm with you. We have to make them think we've given up." Kieran's lips twitched in a tired, conspiratorial smile. "Then we give them a show. For the next few days, we'll pack up. We'll dismantle my camp bit by bit, make it look like I'm giving in to their threats. But at night, we'll work." Sena felt a thrill of rebellion that was both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time, she wasn't running or hiding, she was fighting back. The next few days were a blur of tension and quiet intimacy. During the day, they worked together, slowly and methodically packing up Kieran's camp. They folded the tent, packed away the core samplers, and organized the stacks of rock samples into labeled boxes. They talked and laughed, creating a carefully constructed illusion of defeat for anyone who might be watching from the shadows. Sena had never had a partnership like this. It was a shared secret, a quiet rebellion, and it was the most real she had ever felt. She found herself watching Kieran as he worked, the way his brows furrowed in concentration, the quiet strength in his hands as he taped a box shut. The physical distance between them had all but vanished, replaced by a fierce, undeniable closeness. The ghost pack's silence during the day was deafening. They were either confused by her actions, or, more likely, holding their judgment until the end. But at night, their true work began. Under the cover of darkness and a thick canopy of leaves, they crept back to the gorge. The trees Lachlan had sabotaged stood like silent, wounded giants, their bases scarred with saw marks. The risk was enormous. A gust of wind or an ill-placed footstep could bring the entire bank down on them. Using a small shovel and trowel, Kieran carefully began to dig at the base of the massive granite formation, exactly where Sena's vision had shown her. She used her spectral sight to guide him, directing him around a large, hidden root that would have snapped his shovel, and whispering to him about the precise angle to follow the fissure. The ghosts of her ancestors were close, their presence so thick and chilling that Sena had to wrap herself in an extra layer of blankets, her teeth chattering from a cold that had nothing to do with the night air. "Almost there," Kieran whispered, his face streaked with dirt, his brow beaded with sweat. "I'm hitting something flat and hard. It's not bedrock." As he scraped away the last of the soil, the edge of the stone slab was revealed. It was large and square, a deep gray color, with faint, chiseled lines visible in the faint moonlight. They both knew what it was, the binding truth, the curse made physical. "We have to get a photo of this," Kieran said, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and terror. He fumbled in his pack for a small, waterproof camera designed for underwater archaeology. "This is it, Sena. This is the proof, the reason for all of this." The ghost pack's silence finally broke. It began as a low hum, a single, furious frequency that rattled in Sena's skull. It grew to a full-throated, enraged chorus of voices, not just Lyra's, but all of them. The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate. Pebbles skittered down the rock face. "Don't," Lyra's voice screamed, her spectral form manifesting with such blinding intensity she looked like a star made of ice. "Do not touch it. It is the tether. You will sever us." The air in the gorge turned to lead. The pressure was immense. Sena felt as if every bone in her body was being compressed. She looked at Kieran, his face a mask of fear as he felt the undeniable, crushing pressure that Sena had told him about. He held the camera in his hand, a fragile piece of technology against a powerful, spiritual force centuries in the making. Lyra reached out, her ghostly hand passing through the granite, and a single, perfect fissure cracked the stone's surface, a warning shot that reverberated through the very earth. "This is your last chance," Lyra shrieked, her voice a chorus of 100 angry ancestors. "Leave the truth buried, Senara, choose your home." Sena looked at the ghost of her ancestor, then at the man beside her. Lyra's family was trapped here, unable to pass on. Rorik's family was a violent, exclusionary pack, and Kieran was the first person to ever see her for herself, to trust her, and to believe in the truth of her curse. The choice was no choice at all. "We're taking the photo," Sena said, her voice trembling but firm. She grabbed the trowel and used it to wedge a small rock under the camera to get the best angle, her hand shaking with the effort. Kieran pointed the camera, focusing it on the chiseled stone. He pressed the button. The small, red light on the camera's body flashed on. The ghost pack erupted. The energy was too immense to be contained. The air around the gorge was filled with the sound of 1,000 spectral screams. The pressure wave hit them both, a powerful, spiritual blow that threw them backward, sending them sprawling on the ground. When Sena's vision finally cleared, the camera was clutched tightly in Kieran's hand. He was bruised and terrified, but he was alive, and the photo was taken. They had done it. A low, guttural growl rippled through the trees above them. It was a sound that had nothing to do with spirits. It was a living sound, a low rumble of rage and territorial fury. Sena looked up. In the light of the waning moon, she saw 2 pairs of eyes watching them from the top of the gorge, one pair icy, furious, and entirely human. Rorik. And beside him, 2 more sets of yellow, glowing eyes, watching with the cold, predatory patience of a living predator. They had been discovered. The moment of triumph had just become a death sentence. Chapter 10, Climax, the Binding Manifestation. The low, guttural growl that rippled through the trees above the gorge was not the mournful wail of the spiritual. It was the immediate, terrifying reality of the living pack. Sena's blood turned to ice. She scrambled backward, pulling Kieran up by the arm, her eyes fixed on the ridge. Rorik stood tall and motionless, his silhouette blocking the moon. He was not in his wolf form. He rarely was when confronting pack members or initiating judgment. But the sheer intensity of his fury made him look like a statue carved from granite and menace. Beside him, 2 figures stood, already partially shifted. Their shoulders were broader, their muscles thicker, and their eyes glowed with the hungry, yellow light of predators who had been given permission to hunt. One of them was Lachlan. "You pathetic little shadow," Rorik's voice sliced through the night, echoing down the gorge. It was the coldest, most condemning sound Sena had ever heard him utter. "I gave you a chance to be useful. I gave you a lie to live by, and you choose a trespasser." He pointed a steady, accusing finger at Sena. "You betrayed the silence. You betrayed the blood. You think you're a guardian, but you're just a spy." Kieran, though bruised and terrified by the recent spiritual manifestation, held the camera tightly. He looked from Rorik's menacing figure to the wolf eyes beside him, finally understanding the true, violent power of Sena's militia. "We have the inscription, Rorik," Kieran shouted, the words shaking but defiant. He held up the camera as if it were a shield. "We know what you're hiding. We know the truth about the ancestors being trapped." The declaration didn't frighten Rorik. It merely solidified his murderous intent. "Kill them," Rorik commanded, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. Lachlan and the other wolf didn't hesitate. They dropped to all fours, their transformation completed in a swift, sickening snap of bone and stretch of skin. 2 massive, shadow-colored wolves launched themselves over the edge of the ridge, scrambling down the unstable rock face towards the gorge floor. Sena reacted instantly, driven by instinct honed over years of avoiding her own kind. "The trees, Kieran, run for the trees." She pointed not toward the dense forest, but toward the area Lachlan had sabotaged hours earlier. They needed chaos, and she knew exactly where to find it. Sena gripped Kieran's hand, pulling him away from the slab and toward the base of the massive pines whose roots had been severed. "They'll fall right here," Kieran protested, trying to pull back. "That's the point," Sena shouted back. "The ground is compromised. We need to make them think twice." She stopped at the foot of the largest, most damaged pine. The spectral cold was returning now, but instead of Lyra's focused fury, it was the chaotic, panicked energy of 100 ghosts realizing their tether was being fought over by the living. Sena shoved Kieran against the scarred trunk. "Get behind me, and hold that camera, no matter what." As the two wolves closed the distance, Sena did the only thing she could think of. She used the curse she hated. She turned her spectral vision on, focusing every ounce of her concentration on the chaos. She didn't look at the wolves. She looked past them, at the swirling, terrified spirits of her ancestors who were currently thrashing wildly around the granite slab. She channeled the frantic, raw energy of the ghost pack, the rage, the terror, the desperation of the spirits who felt their eternal existence being threatened by the fight. She didn't try to control the ghosts. She deliberately made herself a beacon for their uncontrolled fear. A blast of pure, spiritual anarchy erupted from Sena. The surge of spectral cold hit the two oncoming wolves like a physical hammer blow. They howled, but not from pain. They recoiled from the psychic and sensory overload. They didn't see the ghosts as Sena did, but they felt the terrifying, absolute presence of 1,000 dead ancestors screaming in their minds. The wolves skidded to a halt just feet away, stunned and disoriented. That was the diversion. "Now, Kieran, run," Sena screamed. She shoved him hard, away from the collapsing trees, toward a hidden fissure in the rock she knew led to a disused, ancient deer trail. As Kieran scrambled into the darkness, Sena paused for a fleeting, desperate second. She knew this was the end of her life here, the moment of final banishment. She turned back to face the staggering wolves and the furious, human Rorik who was now descending the slope. But Rorik wasn't focused on the wolves. He was focused on the two figures fleeing. Sena felt Rorik's rage, hot and powerful, before he even reached her. He lunged, not with a wolf snap, but with a man's brutal strength, tackling her from behind. They went down hard on the loose earth. Rorik pinned her with a single, massive hand pressing against her throat, his face inches from hers. His eyes were burning with a hatred that extinguished any trace of brotherhood. "You are nothing," Rorik snarled, his breath hot against her ear. "You are weak blood and you chose the wrong side. You are no longer one of us. You are banished." He then lifted her and slammed her body against the jagged granite formation. The impact was dizzying, searing pain exploding through her back and ribs. Sena gasped, her vision blurring, but the contact with the rock, the heirloom's tether, briefly magnified the spiritual chaos around them. The shockwave of the magnified spectral energy was too much. The ground trembled. The already severed roots of the largest pine finally gave way with a horrific, splintering crack. "Get down," Sena managed to choke out, even as Rorik stood over her. The colossal tree, hundreds of years old, began its terrifying, agonizing fall. Rorik, sensing the physical danger of the living world finally intervening, lifted his massive arm just in time, shielding his head as the pine crashed down with the force of a bomb, tearing earth and rock. The two wolves, still stunned by the spiritual attack, scrambled out of the way just as the crown of the tree hit the riverbank with a ground-shaking thud. The noise was deafening. The gorge was filled with dust, splinters, and the lingering, metallic scent of ozone and fear. In the ensuing chaos, Rorik's iron grip slackened for a crucial second. Sena, drawing on one last reserve of desperate energy, kicked out, pushing him off balance. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the throbbing pain, and plunged into the darkness where Kieran had disappeared. Sena. She found Kieran hiding in the narrow rock fissure. He pulled her against him, holding her tightly. His fear was palpable, but his focus was only on her. "We have to go. They'll be right behind us," he whispered, his lips brushing her temple. As they began to crawl down the fissure, Rorik's voice, a mighty, terrible bellow that was neither human nor wolf, but pure alpha fury, tore through the forest, a final, unshakable decree. "Senara, if you ever step foot on this land again, you are dead. You are hunted." The finality of the banishment was crushing, yet liberating. Sena paused, her body aching, her lungs burning, the taste of dirt and blood in her mouth. She looked at Kieran, his face lit by a single tear that tracked through the grime on his cheek. In that moment of absolute, shared terror and flight, she knew their connection was irrevocably sealed. He reached up, cupped her bruised face, and kissed her, a hard, desperate, confirming press of lips that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with survival. "We run now," Kieran said, his voice raw. He led the way, slipping out of the fissure and onto the forgotten deer trail. Sena followed, the pain in her body a dull counterpart to the terrifying thrill in her heart. She was officially an outcast, hunted by her living family and damned by her dead ones, but she was no longer alone. She had lost her home, but she had gained a truth and a partner to fight for it. She held the last, vital proof in her mind and knew Kieran held it in his hand.